You ever walk into a room where the air conditioning is set too expensive, and the silence is so heavy you feel like you need permission to breathe? That was the Obsidian Room in downtown Manhattan on a Tuesday night, a place where a steak costs more than my rent, and the people eating it treat the staff like sentient furniture. I was standing there, holding a silver tray that weighed about as much as my student loans, trying to be invisible, when the voice of Sterling Vance cut through the clinking of crystal glasses like a serrated knife. "Why is this girl still hovering? Is she deaf or just slow?" He didn't whisper it. Men like Sterling Vance don't whisper. They broadcast. He was sitting at the center table, the king's corner, a billionaire tech mogul who wore suits that cost more than my mother's life savings. He was pointing at me with a half-empty flute of vintage champagne, his face twisted into that specific kind of sneer that only comes from never having been told no. "In 60 years, look at her hands," he laughed, gesturing to his table of sycophants. "Rough, dry, ashy. She probably spent the morning scrubbing floors in the Bronx. And now they let her touch my Wagyu? It's unsanitary. My name is Maya. I'm 24 years old. And yeah, my hands are rough. They're rough because I work double shifts at this restaurant and spend my mornings stocking shelves at a grocery store to pay for my mom's heart medication. But in that moment, standing on that plush carpet with 50 pairs of eyes burning into my back, I wasn't Maya the daughter or Maya the student. I was just the help. I kept my head down, staring at the polished tips of Vance's Italian leather shoes. "I apologize, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady, trained to swallow pride like it was cheap whiskey. "I was waiting for a pause in conversation to refill your water." "I can get a refill when you learn to read the room," he snapped, turning to his assistant, a terrified young man named Kevin. "This is what happens when HR tries to meet a diversity quota. You get people from the gutter who smell like the subway. Get me a real server, someone who knows what class means." The restaurant went dead silent. The piano player actually stopped mid-chord. You could hear the hum of the wine fridges. It was that kind of humiliation that makes your skin feel too tight for your body. No one stood up for me. Not the manager, who was hiding near the host stand. Not the other wealthy patrons who preached charity at their galas. They just watched, sipping their wine, waiting to see if the bug would get squashed. But here's the thing about me: I don't break. I've been poor, I've been hungry, and I've been invisible, but I don't break. I felt the weight of a small, leather-bound book in my apron pocket. It was my grandmother's pocket dictionary, battered and taped together. It was my anchor. I took a breath, straightened my spine until it popped, and looked Sterling Vance dead in the eye. "Sir," I said, and then I switched. I didn't speak English. I opened my mouth and let flawless, lyrical French pour out. The kind of Parisian French you hear in the diplomatic districts of the 7th arrondissement. "Monsieur, I understand your order perfectly. The filet mignon, medium rare, with the béarnaise sauce on the side to avoid sogginess. Would you also care to see the reserve wine list?" Vance's glass froze halfway to his mouth. His jaw actually unhinged a little. But I wasn't done. I turned to his guest, a Japanese investor named Mr. Tanaka, who looked uncomfortable with Vance's outburst. I bowed slightly, shifting gears instantly. "Tanaka-san, perhaps you would prefer the menu explained in your native tongue? We have an excellent steak from the Niigata prefecture that pairs beautifully with the ribeye." Japanese, crisp, formal, respectful. Mr. Tanaka's eyes widened and a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Vance looked like he'd been slapped with a wet fish. He started to stammer, but I pivoted again. This time, Italian. Florentine dialect, melodic and sharp. Or maybe, gentlemen, Italian is more your speed. If the atmosphere here is too gutter for you, I can recommend a trattoria down the street. Then Spanish. Then Mandarin. Then Arabic. I stood there, a black girl from Queens in a stained apron, and I conducted a linguistic symphony round that table. I stripped him of his arrogance layer by layer, language by language. Finally, I switched back to English, my voice dropping an octave. "Calm and cold as ice. I speak 7 languages. Mr. Caldwell." I taught myself using library books and talking to the immigrants in my neighborhood, the people. You say smell like the subway. English is actually the boring one. I tilted my head, looking down at him like he was a toddler throwing a tantrum. Now, would you like a real server, or is there anything else I can get for you? For 10 seconds, nobody moved. A fork clattered onto a plate somewhere in the back. The bartender had stopped pouring a martini and was just staring, gin overflowing onto the counter. Vance turned a shade of purple I'd never seen on a human being. He opened his mouth, closed it, and then looked at it. "Give me the phone," I said. I took the device from his sweating hand. I didn't just translate. I negotiated. The German on the other end was fast, angry, and technical legal jargon about equity splits and liability clauses. I switched into business German, a dialect I'd learned from a retired professor who ran the bodega on my block. I smoothed over the rough edges. I used a specific German idiom about patience yielding the best beer. The man on the other line laughed. The tension broke. 5 minutes later, I handed the phone back. "The deal is signed, Mr. Vance." He agreed to the 12% stake. Vance looked at me like I was an alien. "You saved the deal. You just saved me $40 million. I translated a conversation, I said, wiping the phone on my apron before setting it down. "It's what the help does." I turned to walk away, feeling 10 feet tall. But the world doesn't like it when the invisible people suddenly become visible. Waiting for me by the kitchen doors was Julian, the Mactor D. Julian was a weasel of a man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. He grabbed my arm, pulling me into the service corridor. "What do you think you're doing?" He hissed. "I was doing my job, Julian. Actually, I was doing yours, you embarrassed AVIP." He spat, his face red. "You made Mr. Vance look incompetent in front of his guests. We are a service industry, Maya. We are the background. You don't outshine the money." I saved his deal. "I don't care. He's uncomfortable now. And when a billionaire is uncomfortable, I lose money." He ripped the ID badge off my apron. "Get out. You're done. Don't even clock out." They escorted me out the back door, past the dumpsters. It had started to rain, of course it had. Cold, biting New York rain that mixes with the city grit and turns everything gray. I stood in the alley, the adrenaline crashing, leaving me shaking. I had just saved a man $40 million, and my reward was being fired. I checked my phone. One new voicemail from the hospital. "Miss Brooks, this is the billing department. We need the remaining $20,000 for your mother's pacemaker surgery by tomorrow morning, or we lose the OR slot. Please call us." I slid down the brick wall until I hit the wet pavement. I put my head in my hands and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, just a jagged, broken sob. I had $1,200 in my bank account. I needed $20,000, and I had just lost the only job that let me work overtime. I looked at the puddle reflecting the neon sign of the restaurant. The Gilded Lily. Irony is a cruel joke. I was done. I was going to have to call the hospital and tell them to cancel. I was going to have to watch my mother die because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. "You have excellent German syntax, by the way." The voice came from the shadows of the alley entrance. I jumped, scrambling to my feet, clutching my bag. A man was standing there, holding a black umbrella. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen wars, not fashion runways. He had silver hair and eyes that looked like they were scanning a chessboard. "Who are you?" I demanded, backing up. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, stepping into the light. He didn't look like a customer. He looked like a wolf in a wool coat. I was at the table in the corner, the one nobody pays attention to. "Good for you," I snapped. "I'm not in the mood for an exit interview. I've been watching you for 6 months, Maya." He said calmly. That stopped me cold. "Excuse me. I eat here 3 times a week. I've heard you whispering in Spanish to the busboys. I heard you correcting the chef's French pronunciation when you thought no one was listening. I know you spend your breaks reading textbooks." He took a step closer. "I was wondering when you were going to show the world what you could do. Tonight, you finally did. And look where it got me." I gestured to the trash cans. "Fired in an alley. Vance is an idiot," Thorne said, dismissing the billionaire with a wave of his hand. "He sees a waitress. I see a weapon." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. "I run a firm called Thorne Global. We fix problems for people who have more money than sense. I have a client arriving in 20 minutes. A British matriarch named Lady Alistair. She's notoriously difficult, hates Americans, and refuses to speak English during negotiations because she thinks it gives her the upper hand. She speaks a specific dialect of Vietnamese she learned during the war. He looked at me. Do you speak Vietnamese, Maya? I hesitated. My neighbor, Mrs. Nguyen. She taught me. Northern dialect. Thorne smiled. It was a terrifying, shark-like smile. Perfect. I need a director of client relations. Starting salary is $150,000 a year, plus a signing bonus. Say $20,000, payable tonight. My heart stopped. $20,000. The surgery, you're offering me a job? I whispered. Here now. I'm offering you a lifeline, Thorne said. But there's a catch. There's always a catch. The meeting is inside. He pointed to the back door of the restaurant. I need you to walk back in there, looking like that wet hair, cheap coat. Fire Dan, I need you to sit at my table and help me close this deal. I need you to show Vance and Julian and everyone else that they didn't break you. I looked at the door. I looked at the rain soaking my sneakers. I thought about my mom lying in that hospital bed, trusting me. I touched the dictionary in my pocket. Do I get a company card? I asked. Thorne's smile widened. Limitless. Then let's go. Walking back into that restaurant was the longest 10 yards of my life. When the kitchen doors swung open, the noise of the dining room didn't stop, but the energy shifted, heads turned. I walked past the lying cooks who had refused to look me in the eye when I was fired. Now, they stared, confused. I walked past Julian, the manager. He stepped forward, his face twisting into a mask of outrage. You, he hissed, blocking my path. I told you to leave the premises. I'm calling the police for trespassing. I didn't stop walking. I didn't even slow down. Elias Thorne stepped up beside me, radiating a kind of dark power that made Julian shrink back. She's with me, Julian, Thorne said, his voice low and dangerous. And if you speak to my director of global relations with that tone again, I will buy this building just to fire you. Julian froze, his mouth opening and closing like a goldfish. I breezed past him, my wet sneakers squeaking on the marble floor, head held high. We walked straight to the best table in the house reserved for Thorne right next to Sterling. Vance's table. Vance looked up, a piece of steak halfway to his mouth. He saw me. He saw the wet hair, the defiance. He looked at Thorne, and realization dawned on him. He knew who Elias Thorne was. Everyone in high finance did. Thorne was the guy you called when you needed a government toppled or a merger saved. And he had just hired the waitress. Vance shrank into his chair, suddenly looking very small. But the real challenge hadn't arrived yet. 5 minutes later, the front doors opened, and a hush fell over the room that was different from the earlier silence. This was reverence. Lady Alistair walked in. She was tiny, maybe 80 years old, draped in velvet and pearls, leaning on a cane topped with a silver skull. She didn't walk. She glided. She was followed by an entourage of nervous assistants. She sat down at our table, ignoring Thorne's outstretched hand. She looked at me, at my soaked clothes, my rough hands, and curled her lip. Americans, she said, speaking in rapid, complex Vietnamese, always bringing stray dogs to the dinner table. This is an insult, Elias. Thorne looked at me. It was my turn. I took a sip of water, looked her dead in the eyes, and responded in the same northern Vietnamese dialect, capturing the specific tonal inflection of Hanoi. The dog that survives the storm bites harder than the wolf that sleeps by the fire. Lady Alistair, I am not a stray. I am the one who is going to make sure you get the deal you deserve. Lady Alistair froze. Her assistants gasped. The cane slipped slightly in her grip. She stared at me, her eyes narrowing, searching my face. You speak the tongue of the Red River, she whispered, still in Vietnamese. Where did a child like you learn the language of my youth? From a woman named Mrs. Nguyen in Queens, I replied. She told me stories of the evacuation, of the smoke and the helicopters. Lady Alistair's mask cracked. For the next hour, I didn't just translate. I bridged to worlds. We talked numbers. Yes, it was a $200 million acquisition, but we also talked about history, about loss, about survival. I saw Vance watching us from the next table, trying to eavesdrop, looking like he wanted to disappear. He had dismissed me as trash, and now I was brokering the biggest deal in the room. As we were signing the papers, Lady Alistair put her pen down. She looked at me, her expression softening into something unreadable. "Your last name," she said, switching to English for the first time. The room went quiet to hear her. "Thorne introduced you as Maya Brooks. Is that right?" "Yes, ma'am." "Brooks," she rolled the name around. "My first husband was a Brooks, a medic. He died in Saigon in '75. She reached into her purse, her hands trembling slightly, and pulled out an old, faded photograph. It was black and white. Creased down the middle dot, it showed a young, fierce-looking black woman in a nurse's uniform standing next to a very young Lady Alistair. In a jungle field hospital, they were arm in arm, covered in dust, smiling despite the war behind them. "This woman," Lady Alistair said, her voice shaking. "Her name was Rose Brooks. She saved my life when the convoy was bombed. She carried me 2 miles on her back to the extraction point. I searched for her for 30 years. I hired detectives. I never found her. I felt the blood drain from my face. I reached into my apron pocket. I was still wearing the stupid apron and pulled out the dictionary. I opened it to the inside cover, where my grandmother had written her name in neat, looping cursive, property of Rose Brooks, 1970. I slid the book across the table. Lady Alistair gasped. She touched the handwriting like it was sacred scripture. She looked up at me, and the imperious billionaire was gone. Just an old woman looking at a ghost. "She was your grandmother," she whispered. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with tears. "She passed away 3 years ago. She never talked about the war. She taught me that words could save you."